"Get your hands out of your pockets now, old man," I said now. The officer's voice cracked with unearned authority, his hand hovering over his holster. Andre Davis didn't flinch. At 68, he had faced enemy fire in the Persian Gulf. A rookie cop with a god complex at a Virginia gas station wasn't going to make him shake. "Officer, I am simply reaching for my wallet," Andre said, his voice a calm rumble. "Shut up and turn around," Officer Jason Miller barked, slamming the elderly man against his truck. The crisp, biting chill of an October morning hung over Alexandria, Virginia. The sky was just beginning to bruise with the purple and gold hues of dawn, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete of the Sunoco gas station on Route 1. For 68-year-old Andre Davis, mornings like this were a sacred ritual. They reminded him of the quiet moments on the deck of a destroyer, the brief, peaceful breaths drawn before the chaos of a naval deployment. Andre was a man of routine and discipline. Today, he was dressed for a day of hard labor in his beloved rose garden. Worn, earth-stained denim jeans, heavy steel, toed work boots, and a faded, oversized gray hoodie that had seen better days. He looked every bit the part of a tired, working-class grandfather. Nothing about his appearance betrayed the truth. Andre Davis was a retired Vice Admiral of the United States Navy, a decorated veteran of Operation Desert Storm, and a man who had commanded thousands of sailors in multi-million-dollar warships. He stood beside his 2012 Ford F-150, the nozzle of the gas pump resting in the tank, his weathered hands tucked into the front pocket of his hoodie to ward off the autumn chill. He was humming a low, wordless jazz tune, his mind occupied by the acidity of his garden soil and the impending winter frost. Across the street, the deep, guttural hum of a V8 engine shattered the morning calm. A black and white Dodge Charger police cruiser idled at the red light. Behind the wheel sat Officer Jason Miller. Miller was 34, sporting a tightly cropped military-style haircut ironic, considering he had washed out of Marine Corps boot camp due to insubordination and a deeply ingrained chip on his shoulder. He had been with the Alexandria Police Department for just under 5 years, a tenure marked by 3 excessive force complaints, all conveniently swept under the rug by a sympathetic union representative. Miller viewed his badge not as a shield for the public, but as a crown. He was a predator in uniform, always searching for a reason to assert dominance. Through the windshield of his cruiser, Miller's eyes locked onto the Sunoco station. He saw an elderly black man in raggedy clothes standing beside a truck. To Miller's prejudiced mind, the scene didn't compute as an innocent morning errand. In his skewed reality, a black man in a hoodie at 6 a.m. was inherently suspicious. He didn't see a citizen pumping gas. He saw an opportunity to exercise his authority. Miller flicked on his light bar no sirens, just the menacing, silent strobe of red and blue reflecting off the station's canopy. He aggressively cranked the steering wheel, cutting across 2 lanes of empty traffic, and pulled his cruiser into the Sunoco lot, slamming the brakes so hard the nose of the Dodge dipped violently. He parked at a sharp, diagonal angle, intentionally blocking Andre's truck from leaving. Andre watched the cruiser approach with the calm, analytical gaze of a military tactician. He didn't tense up. He didn't alter his posture. He simply noted the aggressive maneuver, the tactical positioning of the vehicle, and the purposeful, heavy-footed stride of the officer stepping out of the car. Miller adjusted his duty belt, puffing out his chest to make himself appear larger. He unclipped the retention strap on his holster, a subtle but deeply aggressive gesture meant to intimidate. "Morning, officer," Andre said, his voice deep, resonant, and entirely unbothered. He didn't pull his hands from his hoodie pocket, as it was 38 degrees outside. "What are you doing here?" Miller demanded, his tone dripping with condescension. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't ask how Andre was doing. He spoke as if he were addressing a stray dog that had wandered onto his property. "Pumping gas," Andre replied smoothly, nodding toward the nozzle currently clicking away in his truck. "Is there a problem?" "The problem is you look out of place," Miller sneered, stepping into Andre's personal space. The smell of cheap cologne and stale coffee radiated from the officer. "We've had a string of break-ins in this neighborhood. You match the description." It was a blatant, fabricated lie. There had been no break-ins on this stretch of Route 1. and even if there had been, the likelihood of the suspect being a near 70-year-old man filling up a pickup truck was zero. Andre knew the game. He had seen it played out on the news, and he had experienced variations of it throughout his life, long before the stars had been pinned to his collar. "I sincerely doubt that, son," Andre said calmly, the word son slipping out not as an insult, but as a habit of an older man addressing a younger one. Miller's eyes narrowed, his face flushing with immediate rage. "Who the hell are you calling son, boy?" The racial slur hung in the cold air, heavy and poisonous. "I need your ID. Now." The word boy echoed in the silence of the gas station. For a fraction of a second, the Vice Admiral vanished, and the proud, deeply respected black man took over. Andre's jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck cording slightly. He had earned the respect of the President of the United States. He was not about to be demeaned by a small-minded man hiding behind a piece of tin. However, Andre's lifetime of discipline held his temper in check. He knew that any sudden movement, any flash of anger, would be exactly the excuse Miller was looking for. "My identification is in my wallet," Andre said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a commanding timbre that usually made junior officers stand at attention. "My wallet is in my back right pocket. I am going to slowly remove my hands from my hoodie, and I am going to reach for it." "I didn't tell you to narrate your life story," Miller barked, his hand dropping directly onto the grip of his service weapon. "I said, get your hands out of your pockets and give me your ID. Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Andre stated firmly, freezing his movements entirely. "I am trying to comply safely. You are escalating this situation unnecessarily. Do not tell me how to do my job." Miller was shouting now, his voice echoing off the aluminum roof of the gas station. The veins in his neck were bulging. He was spiraling into a rage born of his own insecurity. At that moment, the gas pump clicked, signaling the tank was full. The sharp metallic sound startled Miller. In a gross overreaction, the officer lunged forward. He grabbed Andre by the collar of his faded hoodie and violently spun the elderly man around. With a brutal shove, Miller slammed Andre face-first against the side of the Ford F-150. The impact was sickeningly loud, the thud of bone against metal ringing out in the morning air. Pain exploded in Andre's left shoulder, the exact spot where, 30 years prior, Iraqi shrapnel had torn through his flesh. A sharp gasp escaped Andre's lips, but he bit down on his tongue, refusing to give the officer the satisfaction of a cry. "Spread your legs. Spread 'em," Miller screamed, violently kicking Andre's feet apart, nearly making the older man fall. Miller yanked Andre's arms behind his back, twisting the injured shoulder with excessive, punishing force. The cold steel of handcuffs snapped tightly around Andre's wrists, biting deep into his skin. Unbeknownst to Officer Miller, they were no longer alone. A 19-year-old college student named Marcus, who had pulled up to the pump on the opposite side of the station to grab a morning Red Bull, had witnessed the entire interaction. Recognizing the terrifyingly familiar pattern of police brutality unfolding before him, Marcus had ducked behind his Honda Civic, pulled out his iPhone, and hit record. Through the lens of the camera, the grotesque abuse of power was perfectly framed. "You're making a catastrophic mistake, officer," Andre said, his cheek pressed flat against the cold metal of his truck. His voice was no longer just calm, it was cold as ice. It was the voice of a man who held absolute certainty in the consequences of the universe. "Shut your mouth," Miller hissed, pressing his forearm against the back of Andre's neck, grinding his face into the truck. "You're under arrest for assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, and loitering." "Assaulting an officer?" Andre repeated, almost chuckling despite the searing pain in his shoulder. "You're going to have a very difficult time explaining that to a judge, considering you never even let me take my hands out of my pockets." Miller grabbed Andre by the center chain of the handcuffs and roughly yanked him backward, marching him toward the cruiser. He shoved the elderly man into the back seat of the Dodge Charger, intentionally pushing his head down hard against the doorframe. As Miller slammed the door shut, he looked around the gas station, puffing his chest out once more, victorious in his twisted little war. From behind his Honda, Marcus stopped recording. His hands were shaking, but his thumb immediately tapped the share button, sending the high-definition video directly to his cloud drive, ensuring it could never be deleted. Inside the cruiser, Andre Davis sat in the uncomfortable plastic back seat. His shoulder was throbbing, and his wrists were bleeding where the cuffs had cut the skin. But as he looked at the back of Miller's head through the metal partition, Andre felt no fear. He only felt a deep, resolute certainty that Jason Miller was about to experience the full, uncompromising weight of the United States justice system. The karma was going to be biblical. Precinct 42 smelled exactly how Andre remembered military brigs smelling. A depressing cocktail of industrial floor wax, stale black coffee, and human anxiety. Officer Miller had marched Andre through the bullpen with exaggerated roughness, parading him in front of the other desk officers like a hunting trophy. A few officers cast uncomfortable glances at the elderly man, noting his calm demeanor and the complete lack of threat he posed, but the deeply ingrained blue wall of silence kept their mouths shut. Miller forced Andre into Interrogation Room B, a small, windowless concrete box illuminated by a harsh, buzzing fluorescent tube. He shoved Andre down into a bolted metal chair and uncuffed him, only to immediately recuff his right wrist to a heavy steel ring welded to the table. "Comfortable, Granddad?" Miller sneered, leaning over the table, planting his knuckles on the metal surface. "You know, if you had just learned some respect, you'd be planting tomatoes right now instead of looking at a felony charge." Andre slowly rolled his free shoulder, wincing slightly as the shrapnel scar flared with pain. He looked up at Miller, his eyes completely devoid of intimidation. "It's roses, actually," Andre corrected softly. "And as for respect, it is a currency that must be earned. You, Officer Miller, are entirely bankrupt." Miller's face contorted. He slammed his hand on the table. "You think you're smart? I'm writing you up for aggravated assault. I'm going to say you took a swing at me. Who do you think the judge is going to believe? A decorated officer of the law, or some raggedy old thug from Route 1? "I think," Andre said, leaning back in his chair as far as the cuff would allow, "that you should check my wallet. You confiscated it during intake. I would strongly advise you to have your shift commander look at its contents. I don't take orders from you." Miller barked, turning on his heel. "You sit there and rot. You'll get your phone call when I decide you get it." He slammed the heavy metal door shut, the deadbolt clicking with finality. Out at the booking desk, Sergeant Wilkes, a 20-year veteran of the force who was counting down the days to his pension, was lazily cataloging the personal effects Miller had tossed into a plastic bin. He pulled out Andre's worn leather wallet to inventory the cash and ID. Wilkes flipped the wallet open. The first thing he saw was a standard Virginia driver's license. Andre Davis, age 68. Clean record. Wilkes sighed, annoyed that Miller had brought in another bogus collar just to flex his ego. But as Wilkes pulled the driver's license out to place it in the evidence bag, his thumb brushed against a heavy, rigid card tucked behind it. Curious, Wilkes pulled the second card out. The sergeant's blood ran cold. The air in his lungs vanished. It was a United States Department of Defense identification card. It had a thick gold border, signifying high-ranking retired status. The name read, Davis, Andre T. But it was the rank beneath the name that made Sergeant Wilkes's hands begin to tremble violently. Vice Admiral, USN, Ret. Wilkes swallowed hard. A 3-star admiral. The equivalent of a lieutenant general, a man who had likely briefed Congress and commanded fleets. And Miller, that arrogant, meat-headed rookie, had just dragged him in here in handcuffs, bruised and battered, on a fabricated charge. "Hey, Wilkes, did you process the old man stuff?" Miller asked, strutting up to the desk with a fresh cup of coffee, looking thoroughly pleased with himself. Wilkes slowly looked up from the ID card, his face the color of wet ash. "Miller," Wilkes whispered, his voice trembling, "what exactly did you arrest this man for?" "Resisting, assaulting an officer," Miller said dismissively, taking a sip of his coffee. "Standard garbage." "Why?" Wilkes didn't answer. He didn't even breathe. He grabbed the gold-bordered ID card, bolted up from his desk, and sprinted down the hallway toward the glass-walled office of Captain Reynolds, the precinct commander. Miller frowned, confused by the veteran sergeant's panic. "Hey, what's the rush?" he called out, but Wilkes was already gone. Inside the interrogation room, Andre Davis sat perfectly still. He closed his eyes and began the mental exercises he used to endure long, grueling hours in the Pentagon Situation Room. He wasn't thinking about the pain in his wrist or the cold metal chair. He was calculating his next move. He had already mentally drafted the resignation letter of the officer who arrested him. It was just a matter of time before the hammer fell. Captain Reynolds was a pragmatic man who despised paperwork and loathed public relations nightmares even more. When Sergeant Wilkes burst into his office without knocking, Reynolds was ready to read him the riot act. But the words died in his throat when he saw the sheer terror on the older officer's face. "Captain," Wilkes gasped, slamming the heavy DoD ID card onto Reynolds' desk. "Look at what Miller just dragged in from Route 1. Reynolds picked up the card. He adjusted his reading glasses. He read the name. He read the rank, Vice Admiral. He looked at the photograph of the dignified black man in a crisp white Navy uniform, chest heavy with ribbons, including the Silver Star and the Legion of Merit. "Tell me," Reynolds said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly whisper. "Tell me Miller didn't lay hands on this man." Wilkes swallowed. "Miller brought him in cuffed. Said he fought back. Booked him for aggravated assault." "God almighty," Reynolds breathed, the color draining from his face. He felt his career, his pension, and the entire reputation of the Alexandria Police Department standing on the edge of a precipice. "Where is he?" Interrogation Room B, cuffed to the table. Captain Reynolds moved faster than a man his age had any right to. He practically tore the door off its hinges as he sprinted out of his office, pushing past a bewildered Officer Miller who was standing in the bullpen. "Captain, what's going on?" Miller asked, stepping into Reynolds' path. "Shut your mouth, give me the key to Room B, and stay right here if you value your miserable life." Reynolds roared, snatching the key ring from Miller's duty belt. Reynolds arrived at the interrogation room and fumbled with the lock, his hand shaking. He threw the door open. There, sitting in the harsh light, dressed in dirty gardening clothes, was Vice Admiral Andre Davis. Despite the handcuffs, despite the bruising swelling on his cheekbone, the man exuded an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. "Admiral Davis," Captain Reynolds stammered, his voice cracking. He rushed forward and immediately unlocked the handcuff binding Andre to the table. "Sir, I cannot express how profoundly sorry I am. There has been a catastrophic mistake." Andre slowly stood up. He didn't rub his wrists. He didn't complain about the pain. He simply looked down at Captain Reynolds with a gaze that had broken enemy combatants. "Captain Reynolds, I presume?" Andre said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Yes, sir. I am the commanding officer of this precinct. We are releasing you immediately. All charges are dropped. I will personally drive you home." Andre adjusted the sleeve of his hoodie. "I will not be going home, Captain. I would like my phone call now. I need to contact my attorney." At that moment, Jason Miller appeared in the doorway, unable to contain his curiosity and arrogance. "Captain, what are you doing? That suspect assaulted me. You can't just let him go." Andre turned his gaze to Miller. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "The uniform doesn't make the man, Officer Miller," Andre said, the words slicing through the air like a scalpel. "But it seems the badge has made you a monster. You thought you found someone voiceless today. You were wrong." Reynolds turned on Miller, his face purple with rage. "Hand over your badge and your weapon, Miller. Right now. You are suspended pending a full internal affairs investigation." Miller's jaw dropped. "For what? For doing my job? He's just a nobody. He is a 3-star Vice Admiral of the United States Navy." Reynolds bellowed, the sound echoing down the halls of the precinct. "He has a Silver Star. He commanded the 5th Fleet, and you assaulted him over a tank of gas." Miller froze. The arrogance melted off his face, replaced by a sudden, sickening wave of pure dread. He looked at the old man in the dirty hoodie, and for the first time, he saw the military posture, the unflinching eyes, the quiet power. Miller realized, with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, that he hadn't just stepped on a landmine. He had thrown himself onto a live grenade. Andre walked past Miller without giving him another glance. "Captain, my phone call." Andre Davis made exactly one phone call. He dialed the direct cell phone number of Eleanor Vance, a woman who had served under him as a JAG officer in the Navy and was now the most ruthless, highly sought-after civil rights attorney in Washington, D.C. By the time Andre walked out of the precinct escorted to a Blacktown car by a desperately apologizing Captain Reynolds, the wheels of destruction were already in motion. But the true tsunami hit 4 hours later. Marcus, the young college student at the gas station, had uploaded his video to X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok. The video was crystal clear. It showed Andre, entirely calm, his hands in his pockets, explaining his actions. It showed Miller's unhinged aggression, the racial slur, the violent assault, and the subsequent unlawful arrest. The internet exploded. The video amassed 10 million views in under 3 hours. It was picked up by CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and every local affiliate in Virginia. The headline "Corrupt Cop Assaults. Retired Navy Admiral over Gas" dominated the news cycle. The Alexandria Police Department was besieged. Protesters gathered outside Precinct 42 within hours. The mayor held an emergency press conference, looking pale and sweating profusely, announcing a full, independent investigation and apologizing directly to Admiral Davis. Jason Miller's world collapsed overnight. He retreated to his apartment, watching his life disintegrate on the 2 4-hour news networks. His police union, which had protected him through his previous infractions, took one look at the high-definition video and the identity of the victim and immediately issued a statement completely severing ties with him. They refused to provide legal counsel. He was radioactive. 2 days later, the hard karma truly began to strike. Miller's fiancée, unable to deal with the public shame, the death threats, and the realization of the monster she was living with, packed her bags and left him, leaving her engagement ring on the kitchen counter. A week later, because he was on unpaid suspension and drowning in legal retainers for his criminal defense, his prized Dodge Ram pickup truck, the one he loved more than anything, was repossessed in the middle of the night. But the financial ruin was nothing compared to the legal hellfire raining down upon him. Eleanor Vance didn't just file a complaint. She filed a massive federal civil rights lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. She sued Jason Miller personally, stripping away his qualified immunity by proving malicious intent, and she sued the city for a staggering $12 million, citing negligent retention for keeping a known violent officer on the force. Furthermore, the Department of Justice caught wind of the case. Federal prosecutors descended on Alexandria, opening a criminal probe into Miller for deprivation of rights under color of law. Miller was isolated, broke, despised by the public, abandoned by his department, and facing decades in federal prison. The man who loved to wield his power to terrify the helpless was now entirely, utterly powerless. 14 months later, the civil trial began in the federal courthouse in Alexandria. The courtroom was packed to absolute capacity with journalists, civil rights activists, and high-ranking military officials who had come to support their former commander. Jason Miller sat at the defense table, looking nothing like the puffed-up predator from the gas station. He had lost 20 pounds. His suit was cheap and ill-fitting. His eyes were hollow, darting nervously around the room. He had no union lawyer. He had a public defender who looked exhausted. When Eleanor Vance called Andre Davis to the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. Andre wore a sharply tailored navy blue suit, his posture impeccably straight. He spoke with the same calm, resonant voice he had used at the gas station. He didn't express anger. He didn't yell. He simply recounted the facts with clinical precision. "I have spent my entire life defending the Constitution of the United States," Andre told the jury, his eyes locking onto them. "I fought in foreign lands to protect the freedoms we hold dear. To return home and be stripped of my dignity, my liberty, and my physical safety by a man sworn to uphold that very Constitution. It is a betrayal not just of me, but of the uniform he wore." The defense's cross-examination was a disaster. They had nothing. The video was irrefutable. When Jason Miller took the stand in his own defense, it was a slaughter. Eleanor Vance systematically dismantled him. She pulled up his previous excessive force complaints. She replayed the video, freezing it on the moment Miller used the racial slur. "Officer Miller," Vance said, pacing before the jury box, "when you looked at my client, Did you see a citizen in need of protection? Or did you see a target you thought was too weak, too old, and too black to fight back? Miller stammered, sweat pouring down his face. I was following procedure. I felt threatened. Threatened by a 68-year-old man with his hands in his pockets? Vance fired back. Or threatened by the fact that he didn't cower before you? The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the four-persons stood up to read the verdict, the tension in the room was suffocating. They found in favor of the plaintiff on all counts: assault, battery, false imprisonment, and severe civil rights violations. The compensatory and punitive damages awarded against the city and Jason Miller personally totaled exactly $12 million. But the financial victory was only half the story. 2 weeks after the civil verdict, the federal criminal trial concluded. Jason Miller was found guilty of felony civil rights violations. The judge, citing Miller's egregious abuse of power and lack of remorse, sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison. As the bailiff slapped the handcuffs on Miller's wrists, the loud click echoing the very sound Miller had forced upon Andre Miller, looked back at the gallery. Andre Davis was sitting there, watching him. Andre didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just offered a slow, deliberate nod. Justice had been served. The $12 million settlement wasn't just a payout. It was a catalyst for change. The city of Alexandria, battered by the lawsuit and the public relations disaster, was forced to implement sweeping police reforms. They instituted mandatory, rigorous de-escalation training, completely overhauled their internal affairs division, and disbanded the union protections that had shielded bad cops like Miller for decades. Andre Davis didn't keep a single dime of the $12 million for himself. His military pension was more than enough to maintain his quiet life in his rose garden. Instead, he established the Route 1 Foundation. The foundation had 2 primary missions: providing full-ride college scholarships to minority youth in the Virginia area and funding independent legal defense teams for victims of police brutality who couldn't afford representation. The first scholarship the foundation ever awarded went to a young man named Marcus, the college student who had possessed the courage to hit record on his iPhone that cold October morning. With his tuition fully covered, Marcus went on to law school, determined to become a civil rights attorney just like Eleanor Vance. As for Jason Miller, his life in federal prison was a stark, brutal reality check. Stripped of his badge, his gun, and his unearned authority, he was just another inmate. He spent his days scrubbing cell blocks and his nights staring at the concrete ceiling, haunted by the memory of the old man at the gas station. He had tried to break a man to make himself feel tall, but in the end, he had only orchestrated his own total destruction. Andre Davis returned to his roses. On crisp autumn mornings, he still drove his 2012 Ford F-150 to the Sunoco station on Route 1. He wore his faded hoodie, he drank his black coffee, and he pumped his gas in peace. The officers who patrolled the neighborhood now knew exactly who he was. When they drove by, they didn't look at him with suspicion or malice. They rolled down their windows, and they offered a crisp, respectful salute. If this story of justice and karma made your blood boil and then brought a smile to your face, you are not alone. What would you have done if you were in the Admiral's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below. We read every single one of them. Don't forget to hit that like button if you believe corrupt cops need to be held accountable, and share this video with your friends and family to spread the message that true dignity can never be handcuffed. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss out on our daily stories of shocking drama, instant karma, and true justice. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.